Welcome to the Tulare County History of Farm Labor and Agriculture Museum. Located geographically between San Francisco and Los Angeles, Tulare County is the second largest producing agricultural county in the state. A generous third of Tulare County is part of the beautiful and fertile Central Valley, which is one of the largest valleys in the world. Its farmlands have yielded an abundance undreamed of in most countries. On less than 1% of the total farmland in the United States, the Central Valley produces 8% of the nation's agricultural output.
The northern part of this valley is known as the Sacramento Valley, and the southern part is the San Joaquin Valley, which fills out the western part of Tulare County. On the eastern side of Tulare County, the Sierra Nevada Range rises to majestic heights. Tulare County's proximity to the Pacific Ocean and distance from the equator, combined with the low-level valley and the high mountain range, create a weather pattern known as a Mediterranean climate. Winters are not very cold and are short in duration. Spring is mild with occasional rains, and summer is long, hot, and dry.
In prehistoric times, Native Americans adapted to this climate as well as the great variety of resources in California. For thousands of years, Indian tribes such as the Miwok, Maidu, Paiute, Shoshone, Chumash, and Yokuts reaped the benefits of this bounteous area. Indians in the Tulare County area often camped along the rivers and at the primitive lake shore. The Yokuts, Western Wenatchee, and the Tuba Tulabal used native plants as their resource for making baskets, clothing, and shelter, as well as their food supply. Acorns were a staple in the Yokuts' diet, as resourceful women made meal and bread from the hard, bitter acorn nuts.
In the 16th century, Spain claimed Alta California as its own, and after Sir Francis Drake and Juan Cabrillo discovered California's many safe harbors, Spain decided to colonize the territory. Led by the pioneering efforts of Gaspar de Portola, Father Serra, and others, the Spanish developed a string of missions from San Diego to Sonoma over the 54-year period from 1769 to 1823. Livestock, field crops, and horticulture were introduced to feed the settlers and to provide economic activity for the converted Native Americans. As Indians provided labor for the missions, they learned new skills which they brought with them as they returned to the valley after the mission's demise.
In 1772, Lieutenant Don Pedro Fages, first Commandante and fourth Governor of the Californias, was the first white man to write that he came into the Central Valley as he searched for deserters from his regiment who had escaped and were living with the Indians. In 1773, Commander Tegas, another Spanish soldier, discovered a huge lake lined with tules and called it Laguna de los Tules, which later lent its name to the general region as Los Tulares.
Father Francisco Garces has the distinction of being the first to explore what is now Tulare County in 1776, and a state-registered marker 16 miles northeast of Delano designates where he baptized a dying Indian boy. In 1826, Jedediah Smith was the first American to cross the Sierra Nevada. He was followed by fur trappers and mountain men such as Kit Carson, Joe Meek, Pegleg Smith, Ewing Young, and Peter Lebec, who all reported the Los Tulares Valley as having an agreeable climate and a plentiful amount of game.
Shortly after Mexico gained its independence from Spain, 13 million acres of Alta California land were granted to form California ranchos, which produce largely one commodity, cattle. Mexican and Indian vaqueros wrangled these animals on unimproved rangeland. Reports and maps of the valley were created by John Charles Fremont after his 1844 visit to this region, and soon even people on the East Coast had heard of the San Joaquin Valley.
The gold rush of 1849 not only increased the region's population by tenfold, but radically altered California's agriculture. The feeding of miners and those who came to profit by serving them created a strong demand for food. The gold rush opened a huge market for mutton, lamb, and beef, as well as other agricultural products. The Tailholt mine along the White River in Tulare County delivered about $1 million in gold, beginning in 1856. But as is the case with many mining camps, only a marker is left to tell the story.
California Indians, already dying out from the white man's diseases like cholera and smallpox, were nearly wiped out with the arrival of the Gold Rush 49ers. The Tule River Indian Reservation was established in 1857 in Tulare County.
Many Gold Rush settlers remained in the valley to build livestock ranches and start lumbering enterprises. The cattle industry remains as a high-income producer in Tulare County's agriculture today.
Tulare County was first organized in 1852 in the shade of what is now recalled as the Charter Oak or Election Tree near Venice Hill. 51 men gathered on that hot day of July 10th to elect the officials of the new county, which at that time was much larger than it is today. Kings, Fresno, Kern, and Inyo counties were all originally included within the Tulare County boundaries.
In 1852, a group of families traveled 8 miles off the main line road in the Four Creeks area and built a log stockade with the help of cattlemen in the area that later became known as Fort Visalia. They stored their wagons inside the fort and settled in for the winter. This location is still recognized by a plaque placed near downtown Visalia, the city often referred to as the oldest between Los Angeles and Stockton. Visalia has served as the center for Tulare County government since 1853. It was named by Nathaniel Vise in 1852 for his ancestral home in Kentucky.
In 1863, Visalia's Main Street boasted a dozen or more businesses. The community pump is now the intersection of Main and Court Street of downtown Visalia. Cultivated acreage in Tulare County jumped from about 6,000 in 1867 to over 1 million in 1887. Wheat acreage alone increased from over 3,000 to more than 349,000 cultivated acres. During this period, large-scale grain farming was moved forward by the development of time-saving machinery.
One invention in the early 1880s came to be known as the Fresno scraper. Its blade could scrape shallow or deep according to the farmer's adjustment, and then deposit excess dirt in low areas of ground. It was even able to level the curious hog wallow mounds which used to cover some of the sections of the valley floor. High-volume grain farmers struggled to save wear and tear on horses and mules who died each summer from overworking and heat. They constantly sought ways to speed up the harvest. In 1886, the Berry steam harvester came to their aid. It was invented by George Stockton Berry, a Tulare County farmer from the area of Lindsay. It was built around an old stationary engine and turned into a traction engine, which was utilized to haul a combined harvester. It was ingeniously run on the cheapest and handiest fuel possible, straw.
Innovations benefited those who worked on the cattle range also. The Visalia saddle is the most famous of all Western working saddles and is still widely sought by Western riders. Juan Martorell, who was originally from Sonora, Mexico, brought his product to Visalia in 1869. When a vaquero had asked him to repair his saddle, Martorell gave it an overhaul which made it lighter, stronger, and more comfortable for rider and horse. Vaqueros and cattlemen were constantly in battle with sheepmen over food and water in the West. Sheep left the feeding ground devastatingly bare, and John Muir, the famous naturalist, complained they were hooved locusts who ruined the watershed as well. Hale Tharp was the first white man to discover the giant forest when he was taken there by the Yokuts in 1858. He eventually brought his cattle to the lush mountain meadows for the summer and built a shelter in the end of a fallen 300-foot tree. It is now a landmark in the crescent meadows of the Sequoia National Park. The sequoia trees of the Sierra Nevada were a huge attraction for lumbermen. By 1870, the giant redwoods were falling at an alarming rate. Before the government stepped in to stop the waste, 1 in 5 trees had been felled. The trees were found to be poor quality lumber and usually shattered as they hit the ground, making them useful only for grape stakes and shingles. Nearly half of the felled trees, some over 3,000 years old, were left on the forest floor, never to be hauled away.
The effort to establish the Sequoia National Park, spearheaded by Valley residents, led to the creation of California's first national park and the second national park in the United States.
The early 1870s saw cotton introduced into the county for the first time. It was backbreaking work, and many African Americans who were imported for the harvest left for better paying jobs. Modern techniques have brought it to a $20 million crop today.
The discovery that water could be pumped from underground brought a huge economic change to Tulare County in the 1890s. Mr. John J. Cairns, a Scotsman who had a sheep business first in New Zealand and then in the San Joaquin Valley, noticed that when his shepherd dug shallow wells for their sheep, they did not dry up as they had in New Zealand. He concluded that a water table existed under the dry plains. Mr. Cairns' first well exceeded all expectations, and most historians agree that this was not only the first pumping of irrigation water in Tulare County, but the first in the state of California.
Farmers were able to find enough water to make a living on a smaller tract of land. This also set the stage for a new industry. It was found that alfalfa, the backbone of the dairy business, could grow year-round in Tulare County. By 1915, Tulare County produced half of California's milk. Today, Tulare County is the top producing county for milk production in the United States.
Refrigeration and pasteurization were not part of the industry in those early days. The first ice plant was finally constructed in Visalia in 1897. As small dairies multiplied, farmers found they needed a wider market for their milk. The first dairy union was formed in 1886 with William H. Blaine as its president. A great-great-grandson of this man happens to be a pecan and walnut grower in Tulare County today. In the United States, only California has the ideal weather and fertile soil, which promotes the growing of every type of nut tree.
A giant step in progress was achieved in Tulare County when the Mount Whitney Power and Electric Company began construction on a flume along the East Fork of the Kaweah River, using redwood lumber from Atwell's Mill near Mineral King, and built a hydroelectric power plant. On June 29, 1899, when the water first surged through Kaweah No. 1, was transformed into energy and was delivered to Visalia. It was called an enterprise of mammoth proportions. On that day, electricity was transmitted a greater distance than had ever been accomplished before anywhere. The Central Valley Project was created in 1933 for the purpose of managing and storing water to help it flow more evenly among the north and central parts of California. This water delivery system turned semi-arid desert into productive farmland. But Tulare County communities remained unprotected from the effects of flooding until 2 new dams were built in 1961.
Today, the Success Dam on the Tule River and the Terminus Dam at Lake Kaweah provide flood control as well as recreation and irrigation.
As each successive wave of immigrants to Tulare County came to discover, no matter what the social climate may be, weather does not discriminate. Drought, flood, and winter freeze have the same effect on every man's harvest.
The larger immigrating groups arriving in Tulare County were Chinese, Portuguese, Basque, Japanese, African American, Armenian, Croatian and Slavonian, Italian, Korean, Dutch, Laotian and Hmong, Filipino, and predominantly Mexican and South American.
In addition to their contributions towards agriculture in Tulare County, these immigrants and others provided a bridge for understanding between their old and new homelands, which benefits both countries.
The Dust Bowl era of 1930 to 1936 occurred as a result of a severe drought coupled with decades of farming methods which eroded the topsoil of American prairie lands. During this period, dark dust storms carried the dry soil as far away as the East Coast. Destitute migrant farmers left millions of acres of land and traveled to California, where they found economic conditions little better than those they had left. Often known as Okies, since so many came from Oklahoma, many Dust Bowl migrants were left without means to purchase their own land and ended up having to travel from farm to farm, picking fruit and other crops at starvation wages.
Adding to these woes, the effects of the Great Depression were everywhere. Farming in rural areas suffered as crop prices fell by approximately 60%. Dust Bowl migrants were often looked upon by their new neighbors as intruders until the economy improved, and World War II brought a need for more labor.
Even though Tulare County had made use of migrant Mexican labor in its agricultural sector since the early 1900s, such labor tended to be both migratory and seasonal, with many workers returning back to Mexico in the winter. The situation changed with the involvement of the United States in World War II that created a labor shortage in the farm industry. As a result, in 1942, the Mexican Farm Labor Program, informally known as the Bracero Program, was developed in conjunction with Mexico. Over the 22-year period, the Bracero Program sponsored some 4.5 million border crossings of guest workers from Mexico.
Unfortunately, conditions in Mexico for the poor and unemployed were desperate enough that illegal employment became attractive to Mexican workers who were willing to take their chances with illegal immigration. This not only eroded the support for the Bracero Program, but also gave these illegal workers no assurances regarding their housing and wages. The end of the Bracero Program in 1964 marked the rise to prominence of the United Farm Workers and many changes for migrant labor under the leadership of Cesar Chavez and others.
Roughly 75% of all Tulare County agricultural labor is performed by hired employees. The amount and types of labor needed varies from one commodity to another, but human work is critical to all agricultural production. It is demanding labor. Many agricultural workers are willing to work very hard at jobs others would not seek. In the process, they have grown and harvested the food that feeds billions of people in California, the United States, and the world. Their manpower has aided in making Tulare County part of the most productive valley in the world.
The 2008 annual Crop and Livestock Report states Tulare County's total gross production value was over $5 billion. Agricultural business in Tulare County also produces income for other areas of the economy, including farm equipment assembly, maintenance and sales, as well as the banking and building industries. Out of more than 120 commodities produced in Tulare County, dairy was the leading commodity in 2008 at nearly $1.8 billion.
The dairy industry in Tulare County is followed by citrus, cattle and calves, other fruits and nuts, field crops, and nursery products. Tulare County's agricultural strength is based on the diversity of crops it produces. Modern farming methods have created a trend of more land being cultivated by fewer farmers.
Tulare County agriculture faces challenges today due to globalization, competing interests in water resources, technology, and a manageable workforce.
These are daunting issues, and the ability to cope with these challenges will depend on the same courage, fortitude, and hard work that has brought Tulare County to become one of the highest producing entities in the world.